صلى على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لم تقولون ما لا تفعلون؟ كبر مقتا عند الله أن تقولوا ما لا تفعلون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Brothers, sisters, friends, Assalamu alaikum jami'a wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I spoke in the previous nights about identity, about our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a fundamental, very important ingredient that we should have in our own identities, in how we think, and what is important in that thinking. But today, I wanted to touch on a topic that I think is very relevant to a lot of us. Relevant to us religiously, but also relevant to us in our daily lives beyond religion. Something to do with decision making. How we make decisions, how we make good decisions, how we make bad decisions. And the toolkit that I'll talk about today is something that's very relevant. It's a lot of interest in this day and age. I'll be sharing with you the Islamic viewpoint and at the same time some academic research, some empirical evidence. And this topic of decision making and biases and how humans think and how we get things right and wrong is currently of a lot of interest. This is a topic that was awarded the Nobel Prize a few years ago. A topic that governments, big organizations are very interested in, and it's shedding a new light, a new understanding about humans and how we behave and how we think. And I want to show you the relevance of some of the values and some of the techniques that have been introduced by religion a long time ago, and their use and the parallels between the two. As I promised, we'll be learning methods from Ahlul Bayt and learning methods and techniques from research. But I guess the first question that many of us face is, why religion? Why should I be religious? Why should we consider religion? I'm a good person, I'm an ethical person. I want to do what is good. I'm rational. So if I can think myself of what is right and what is wrong, and I can make the right decision, then why do I need somebody else to tell me right and wrong? And second, because I'm rational, all I need from you is information. So if you tell me, if you give me sufficient information, enough information about my choices, I have 3 choices, you tell me choice A has these pluses and these minuses, choice B has these pluses and minuses, choice C has these pluses and minuses, I'll make the right choice. Why do I need religion, or anybody for that matter, or law, to teach me how I should make my decisions? Why do you take away some of my rights and tell me you should do this in a certain prescriptive way? And so, like I said, my objectives today is to give you those tools and to demonstrate to you some of the less obvious, perhaps, but very practical benefits of religion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has imprinted into this way of thinking by design. Now, but before I go into that, let me talk about something that's, since we're touching on rationality, so very briefly I want to touch on this concept of why we believe and how we believe and where we get our religion from. As a school of thought, as followers of Ahlul Bayt, we start with logic and rationality. We don't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because we feel like it, because it sounds good to us, because it makes us feel good. These are all valid reasons, but that's not the ultimate reason. We believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala simply because it's the only explanation for our existence. It's a logical, rational decision. Essentially, it's about minimizing risk. Let me give you an example here. If somebody jumps off a building without protection and they hurt themselves, people would say they've done something stupid. They are to blame for the damage they caused themselves because it's a clear risk. They shouldn't have done that. They know there is a damage possible out of this process and they did it anyway. They didn't take the right precautions. If you get in a car and the driver is a mad person and that person takes you into an accident, you're to blame as well because you should have avoided that situation. There's risk. And when it comes to religion, the Prophet ﷺ's argument to his people when he came, he said, do you trust me if I was to tell you that there's an army coming from behind this mountain? They said, of course we trust you. We've known you all our lives and you've always told the truth. We've never known you to say anything except the truth. So if you tell us as a warning there is an army behind a mountain, you know, Mecca is surrounded by mountains. So if there's an army coming from behind a mountain and we can't see the army, we don't know anything about it, all we know is Muhammad is telling us there is an army behind the mountain, we will take precautions. And that's a big deal because it meant people would have to move their homes, take their belongings, go run into the mountain in the other direction to protect themselves. That was the only protection they had. They didn't have an army. So his word was enough for them to take action. He said, well then if you say so, I'm telling you that there is a creator that created you, and there is judgment, and there is reward and punishment. So you should listen to me. Listen to me, not obey me, but listen to me. What he's saying to them is, there's a risk. There's a reasonable risk that if you don't consider religion, I'm not saying if you don't believe in religion, I'm saying if you don't consider religion, then that's a stupid decision. That's an irrational decision. What you need to do is to do research. And if you do research, that's how we think. We start with a rationality, we start from our own minds, we do research. And when you look at the world today, there's only one explanation for our existence. And I'll be very brief here, I just want to highlight it because it's very relevant. And it's each and every one of us. It's our own responsibility to do this research. It's not something you can follow me or follow your parents or follow the scholar in the mosque. It's something you have to understand. That there is only one explanation for our existence. Essentially, my mind, my rationality, everybody's rationality leads us to that we have to do research. When you do research, you find a single explanation for the creation of the universe. We know we exist. Where did we come from? And if you're thinking Big Bang Theory or evolution, these are simply explanations of the mechanism. Big Bang Theory says there was a mass, infinitely dense, somewhere that exploded. Well, who made that mass? And where was it located? That still doesn't explain the universe. If you say evolution, evolution says there were some elements and there were some chemicals and those chemicals reacted together. That doesn't contradict Islam. We're saying, where did the elements come from? Who created the nucleus? Where did it all begin? And today, my brothers, my sisters, there's only one explanation, which is there has to be a creator. And that creator must be able and strong and has given us, because I'm rational, the creator must be rational. And that's the process. So we start with logic to a creator, understanding his attributes, his justice, his ultimate existence. understanding that a rational creator doesn't do something randomly. So he has to tell us. So he has to send messengers to us. And those messengers have to be reliable, trustworthy, so they have to be infallible. And then we reach the Quran, and then we accept what comes out of the process. So I'll be talking about things just to kind of show you that we sometimes rely a bit too much on rationality, but I wanted to establish to you that we, as followers of Ahlul Bayt, we start with logic and rationality. We always accept it, and we don't accept anything that contradicts it. But then the question comes is that why then do I need religion? Why don't I make my own judgments? Why don't I have the information and then decide what is right and what is wrong? And this is called, in economics, economists have for a long time thought about this, and they call it the rational model. Essentially, the argument is if you give people enough information, that's all you need to give them, enough information, and then they'll make the right decision. However, recently there's a lot of research and a lot of evidence which shows that's not always true. That's not always true. So people know they want to eat healthy food. They say, I want to eat healthy food, but they don't. People say, I want to give up smoking. How many people smoke and say smoking is good for you? So why don't they give up? How many people say from New Year's, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I'm going to be nicer to my parents, I'm going to do my homework, and I'm going to, next year in my academic year, I'm going to revise early. I'm not going to leave all my homework to the last minute. I'm going to plan and do my work early. How many of us do it? The question is why? Are we irrational? Or is there something else in there? This idea is called the knowing-doing gap. Essentially, just because you know something, it doesn't mean you'll do it. Just because you know something is right, it doesn't mean you will end up doing what is right. And so a lot of people, an example that's actually causing a major headache for governments around the world is the issue of pension. There are people who work, earn money, spend all their money, they don't save up, and then suddenly they're 70 years old and they don't have any money left, and they have to somehow, somebody has to look after them. Well, they knew they were going to get to 70, right? They knew one day they will be out of their job and they should have saved enough. But why haven't they? Are we all irrational, or is there something else? And this is recently becoming very interesting. And now, like I said, governments and institutions are very interested in this concept that seems humans, like ourselves, rational, educated, nice people, still do the wrong thing although they know the right thing. And there's a lot of it. And so the verse that I started with hints at this. It talks about this very scenario. So the Quran has been talking about this for a long time. It says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لِمَ تَقُولُونَ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. Why do you say things that you do not do? Why is there a disconnect between what you think, what you say, and what you actually do? And there's a context, there's a story to this verse. You know, the Prophet, when he moved from Mecca to Medina, there was the Battle of Badr, and soon after there was the Battle of Uhud. The Battle of Badr was won by the Prophet. It was a very important battle, and then there was the Battle of Uhud. In the Battle of Uhud, something really interesting happened. That the Prophet positioned some of his, so there was a mountain, and the Prophet positioned some of his archers on the mountain, on the side of the mountain, and told them, do not leave your positions regardless of what happens. Stay where you are. Do not move. Whatever happens, whether we get slaughtered or whether we completely win the war, stay on the mountain. You're archers, you're protecting our backs. Don't move. Okay. Now they believed in the Prophet. They believed in his tactical abilities to manage the war. They understood everything, and they stood there. They were really nice people. And there's a bunch of them, not one, not two. There was a whole large number of them. When the battle was won by the Muslims, almost won, they thought, we're standing on the mountain and these people are collecting all the swords and armors and horses that were left by the enemy when they fled, and we're going to get nothing out of this. The battle is finished, so let's go down and kind of collect our share. So they did. Problem is, when the enemy saw that happen, they turned around the mountain and attacked them from the back. It was a battle that ended with the Prophet was hurt. He was almost killed. His face was damaged, his teeth were damaged. He had to fight to defend himself, and very, very few people, including Imam Ali alayhi salam, stood by him. A lot of the Muslims ran away in that moment. And so two things happened. The archers didn't stick, although they knew what is right to do. And those who believed the Prophet is important, and they told him, we will defend you with our lives, ran away. Ran away and left him to fight for his own life. Now, how did that happen? And the Quran is talking about this. They knew what to do, but they didn't do it when it mattered. In this modern day and age, the term we use, they call it the hot state of mind and the cold state of mind. Essentially, normally you know what is right. This is the cold state. This is when you're sitting there analyzing the situation, thinking about it, thinking this is right. Tomorrow I'm going to go this. I have a presentation tomorrow. I'm going to stand there. I'm going to say this word first and that word second, and I'm going to present it this way. Then when your name is called and you're standing in front of your class to give the presentation, you choke. Words don't come out. Your mouth is dry. You can't say anything. You miss out half the things you wanted to say. What happened there? So the cold state, everything was beautiful. But when you stood there in the hot state of mind, when you were making the decisions, you get them wrong. Let me tell you an interesting story happened recently. In the UK, we have elections in May. The major party that's likely to win the elections is the Labour Party. It's led by a guy called Ed Miliband. He wants to be Prime Minister. Ed Miliband gave his most important speech of his life a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago. This is the party conference, and he wants to be Prime Minister. What is the biggest issue that's in the UK today? It's the deficit. Essentially, the government has huge debt because of the financial crisis. There isn't enough money, and he had to talk about his solution to this huge problem. It's his moment of a lifetime. He had to get it right. So he rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed until he memorized his speech. Imagine, right? You're speaking to the world. What would you do? On the day he gave his speech, he finished his speech, and he completely forgot to mention the financial crisis. Completely forgot to mention the deficit. Just skipped it. Those pages in the speech, because he was giving it without a sheet of paper in front of him, because he wanted to appear confident. He wanted to show how good he is, how prime ministerial he is. So he didn't mention it. And until 2-3 days ago was the first time you could talk about it without people making fun of him. The first time he could actually talk about the financial crisis and his solution to the deficit in the UK economy. Now, is this guy irrational? Clearly, he's a leader. He's clearly somebody capable. Why would somebody this capable on a day that's so important forgot a whole chunk of his own speech? He knew what he was going to say, but when it mattered, he choked. So, this and many other incidents like these became very interesting to researchers, started to understand how we think as humans. And they discovered something really remarkable and interesting about us. This is me and you, every single person in this room. We have two states of our minds. A state, they called it System 2, where we rationally put the information in front of us, we think about it, we evaluate it, and then we make a decision. And here, we're rational, we get things right. There's another state when we're under pressure, usually it dominates, but there's another state where we make decisions intuitively. We're unable to think about them, they're very much rehearsed. Let me give you an example. When you learn to drive, if you remember when you learn to drive, or those who are learning to drive, you had to remember everything. You had to think, I need to indicate left, what do I do? There's this little stick here, I'm going to push it down, that will indicate left. I need to stop, where's the brake? I'm going to press the brake, right? You think about it, you think about it. After you've learned to drive, or when you ride a bike, same thing. After a while, when you get in your car, you don't think, where's the indicator? You don't think, where's the brake pedal? You just do it, and you get it right. Because how we learn is when we're doing something new, our system 2 engages. It looks at how we do it, we think about it, we analyze it, and then it passes it to the automatic part of us, the autopilot, the intuitive part. And this is good. Most of the time, this works very well. The problem is, when there's a situation that's not very predictable, system 1 doesn't think, it chokes. So when we're under pressure, the rational part shuts down, we revert to the intuitive part. So those are, sticking to the driving example, when you're driving, you're told if the snow or if it has been raining like it has been the past couple of days here, when the car skids, what do? You take your foot off the brake. You're in a car, you're driving fast, something is ahead of you, imagine a wall ahead of you, you're supposed to brake, you brake, the car skids, what do? You take your foot off the brake to regain control. How many people can do that? At the time of the accident happening, the rational part shuts down. You just cannot remember that information. What you do is you slam your brakes until you hit the wall, then you think, I'm supposed to have taken my foot off the brake, right? And this is something that we all do. Now, who succeeds in this? Professional drivers. They can do this because they've been trained and trained and trained that when it matters, they don't choke. Now you think, why is this relevant? This is very relevant because this is something that we face every single day in our lives without us realizing. Essentially, system 2, the rational, logical part, can only cope with a little bit of information and can only cope with one task at a time. It chokes under pressure, it chokes when tempted, it chokes when many things happen, and we revert to the other one. And the other one, as I've just explained how we learn, needs to be trained slowly over a long period of time, just like when you learn to drive. You do it and do it and do it and do it. Years later, you become an intuitive driver. Years later, you become a good cyclist. But as you're doing it, it's not something quick. So system 2 can learn quickly, but system 1, the intuitive, the dominant part of us, takes a long time to train. And this is an important thought. So knowing isn't sufficient. Under pressure, we do something different. There was a study done in 1970 here in California, in Berkeley. It's known as the marshmallow study. Actually, it wasn't just to do with marshmallows, there were pretzels and other things. Genuinely, honestly, I'm not making it up. They actually gave children options, treats. Some of them were marshmallows. If they liked pretzels, they were given pretzels, right? But the essence of it is this. These are children who were on average 4.5 years old, but they were between 3.5 and 5.5. They were told, you go to a room, you get given a marshmallow in front of you. But you have to wait 15 minutes before you can eat it. If you eat it, you ate it, that's it. But if you wait 15 minutes, they'll give you another marshmallow and you can eat both of them. So 15 minutes, you double your money. You double your marshmallows. But you have to wait. And a lot of the kids, when the researchers left the room, they ate it. Right? They couldn't wait 15 minutes. But some, about a third, didn't eat it. They waited, they managed. And researchers watched them. What did these kids do? Some of them covered their eyes, some of them looked around, some of them did something, but they didn't eat it. They managed to wait 15 minutes. Now, why is this interesting? It's interesting because these kids were followed for years. So this is 1970. These kids were, 4.5. They were followed up to the 90s. These kids are now, approximately 50 years old, right? It was seen that those kids who resisted the temptation, who managed to wait 15 minutes, did better in their SATs, have better weight, have better health, have higher paid jobs. Today, years later, have earned so much more, have succeeded so much more, have done so much better. They're in stable relationships. What's the relationship between marshmallows when you're 4.5 and this? The researchers traced it to something, that those kids who found a way to resist their temptation, to control the intuitive part, I like marshmallows, I'm going to eat them, who were able to kind of control to some extent their system 1 and allow the rational part to think, were able to do so much better in life over many years. Huge impact. Al-Imam Rida alayhi salam was asked once, okay. Today you have treats, you can choose oranges or chocolates. And in a month, we'll give you the same choice. Okay? So what would you like to have today? The majority said, I want chocolates. When they were asked, what do you want to have in a month? They said, I want to be healthy. I'm going to have the oranges. In a month, I'll have the oranges, but today, give me chocolates. So what happened when they visited again in a month? They gave them the choice again. They said, by the way, you can change your mind. What do you want now? They wanted chocolates. What is happening there? What is happening is when you are not tempted, when you're thinking in a month, you're thinking rationally. But now I know what I want now. Now I'll eat the chocolate and then worry about my health next year or in a month. This is why people will give up smoking in a month. They'll lose weight from the beginning of New Year. They'll go to the gym, whenever it is, the next time. That's something we all do. You know another example of this? This is what happens when somebody knows it's in their best interest to do X, but because they're tempted, they make the wrong judgment and they regret it. And it happens all the time. So any situation you can think of which has temptation, which has pressure, such as gender mixing, such as drugs, such as alcohol, such as many other things, you're tempted. And when you're tempted, you think you're rational, but you're not. Something else kicks in and we choke. System 1, System 2 chokes, and something else. We make decisions a bit less rationally and we make mistakes. And so, the Prophet ﷺ once sent a group of people to battle. They went to battle. They came back having won the battle. They won it, right? They've done the hard. Like, battle is hard. Battle is, horses and noises and blood and wounds and death, and it's traumatic. It's painful. They came back and he said, welcome to a group of people that just completed the minor jihad, the minor struggle. أهلا بقوم مرحبا بقوم قضوا الجهاد الأصغر. That they have just completed minor struggle and now they will have to face the major struggle. They thought, we've just come back from war. If war is minor struggle, what is major struggle? He said, jihad al-nafs, struggle against your desires. Why? Because In a war, you could think about it, you could justify it, you're intuitively able to defend yourself. But daily, you're getting pressure on you, and then you slip up. It's very easy to slip up because you're under so much pressure, and you're not engaging the rational side, although you think you are. And we tend to, this is another quirk in our personalities, my brothers, my sisters, we tend to overestimate ourselves. I just mentioned these because I think they're very important for us. They're very important. These are the mechanisms we use to justify to ourselves not doing the right thing. These are the tricks we use to make the wrong decisions. So we overestimate ourselves. This is called overconfidence, and it's remarkable. If I survey this room, and this has been done a lot, you survey a group of people, you find the vast majority of them say that they're above average. Now mathematically, if everybody is above average, then who's below average? If everybody is in the top 50%, then the bottom 50% is empty. So who's in the bottom 50%? If you rank people, somebody's got to be above, if you do a median, somebody have to be, half would be above, half would be below. When you ask them, they all say, the majority of them say we're above. And there are really interesting examples. So people say, this is proven in research, people say they're better drivers than average. We're all better drivers than average. We're better workers than average. We're better leaders than average. We're more polite than average. My favorite is this. We are more humble than average. Statistically, we say, I am more humble than everybody else. Right? But this is proven repeatedly in many pieces of research. And so when you think you're above average, you put yourself in a situation that is compromising, but you think, well, I can cope with it. I know the average person cannot resist alcohol once they've turned up to a bar. I know people give up to peer pressure when they are in a bad situation, but I'm good, right? I won't choke. I won't slip up, so I allow myself to make the wrong steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then when I'm at step 6, I'll make the mistake. So I do mix with the wrong crowd, and I do go to the wrong location, and I do put myself in a very difficult, compromising situation because I think I can cope, but when it happens, of course, I can't cope. And we do this, again, on all levels. Now, another thing we do, which we don't understand we do, is something called escalation of commitment. This is again very, very important for each and every one of us. That when we commit to something small, when we do something small, we say this is really small, it's so irrelevant, it's so unimportant. What's wrong with this very tiny slip? What's wrong with it? It's small. Now, when we do this, we tend to follow it with steps 2 and 3 and 4 and go very deep in it. I'll tell you an interesting example. Researchers wanted to see how far they can push people. So they went to them and they split them into 2 groups. It was done in the US as well. They brought this huge, group 1, they brought these huge billboards, the size maybe of these screens. They said, and they had nice messages about environment or something nice, right? And they said, would you allow us to put this stick it to the front of your door? Just put it in front of your house. It will block your house and make it look horrible. But it's a nice message. People said, the vast majority of them said, no, of course not. Why would I want to do that? To the other group, they took a small card and said, we're doing this campaign, we want to encourage people. Would you put it in your window? Of course, sure. I'll put it in my window. They came in a while later and said, we have this piece, about this big. Would you mind putting it in your window? I said, okay, I'll put it in my window. They came in a while later. And they said, it's this piece, I know it's a bit big, but you know, this campaign is really helpful, you've helped us before, and we would like to put this bigger piece. A significant proportion, 20-something%, actually put the huge pieces in the end in front of their doors. Because they felt they already invested so much. They've already done something. They've already made a mistake. They've already committed to something. So when they came with the obvious, would you like this ugly thing in front of your house? They said no. When they said, would you like this small thing? And then bigger, and then bigger, and then bigger, they did. What does Islam teach us? It teaches the biggest of sins are the ones you disregard. The ones that you perceive to be small and unimportant. Why? Because once you've slipped once, you trained yourself to break the law. You know, like often people say cigarette smoking tends to lead to hard drugs in many cases, or in some cases. There's evidence because people go on that step. When you do step 1, you do step 2. When you do 2, you do 3, and then 4 and 5. Whereas if you faced the 5 steps initially, you would never do it. Perhaps. And this kind of the final example of these quirks in how we think is that we often think of what happened immediately before making the decision. We tend to be very narrow-framed. We think of the situation as if there's nothing else in life. And this is very relevant. We run about our lives thinking about earning money, getting a job, regardless of its consequences on ourselves, on our religion. Why? Why do we do this? Because we're thinking of this life. Although we believe, we say, we have researched, we believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we believed in a day of judgment, and we believe that one day we will be held accountable. But that day we forget. Today I'm making a decision about my job. Now I know my job requires me to live somewhere remote, that I'm not going to see a Muslim community, that my kids are going to grow up in a bad situation, but I'm thinking about the job. I'm not thinking about the consequences of my decision. And so I'm thinking of this decision about the job. I'm thinking about this decision about X, Y, Z. I'm not thinking about what happens. I'm not seeing life as this small piece of a bigger piece, that this life is a transition, that I'm here living for. How many more years am I going to live? Another 10, 20, 30, 50? Reach 100? But this is a very small piece compared to the huge piece of life after the day of judgment. We believe that, but we ignore that. Just to give you another example, researchers were looking at Olympic medalists. You know, in Olympics, somebody wins, you put them on a stand, you know, you get gold, silver, bronze medals, right? They noticed something really interesting, that the person getting the gold medal is smiling, the person getting the bronze medal is smiling, but the person getting the silver medal is not happy. So hang on, this is interesting. Being kind of geeky researchers, they actually pulled the recordings of many Olympics before and watched them and found this to be consistent. The person who is they've just won a silver medal at the Olympics. You'd be happy, right? They're not. The gold medalist is happy, celebrating. The bronze medalist is happy and celebrating, but the person in the middle is not. When they investigated further, they found this really interesting thing. This is a narrow framing example. That the gold medalist is thinking, I've won. The bronze medalist is thinking, I'm better than everybody else. At least I'm on the stand. At least I've managed to make it to the stand. The silver medalist is looking to the gold medalist and thinking, I've lost. I was so close. I was so close, but didn't make it all the way. They don't look at the bronze medalist and say, well, I'm better than him. They're thinking, I was so close to be the best, but I wasn't the best. What is interesting is, years later, they surveyed the same people. And they found, rightly, that the gold medalist is the happiest, then the silver medalist, then the bronze medalist. It was the right order. But it took time. When people calmed down and their system one shut down and then they relaxed and they thought about it rationally, they realized they really achieved. But at that moment in time, when it matters, they're only thinking of the loss, not the gain. And at the time we make our decisions, brothers and sisters, we're thinking of this life, not the day of judgment. And if we start to train ourselves to think broadly, then it will be much more intuitive for us, it will be much easier for us to make the right decisions. And so, when researchers have taken these and looked at what remedies, and I'll be brief here, but I wanted to kind of show you how one of the benefits of religion we don't appreciate is that some of the benefits of religion are literally to help us become better decision makers, even in areas beyond religion. It's a benefit that we don't really consider. Researchers say, take action. Simply knowing is not good enough. Do something about it. Train yourself. Take steps. Knowing that you make mistakes sometimes does not help. Doing is a key word. Doing, not just knowing. So simply knowing right and wrong, saying I'm an ethical person, I'll know what is right when it matters, researchers say is not good enough. You need to do something about it. They say make a commitment and seek external support. Get help, get family to surround you, to help you make better decisions. Reflect your decision on others and see how they feel about it. And get feedback. Does this parallel with how religion tells us the importance of communities, of being here, of surrounding ourselves with the right people, of committing to something? They say pick your battles. You will not be able to cope with many hard decisions at the same time. Choose which battles, which decisions you want to face. Religion tells us, don't put yourself in a situation of sin. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're likely to slip up. Prevention, not cure. Religion focuses a lot on prevention. This is an example of the role of hijab, for example. For both men and women, by the way. Hijab is not just a female-only thing. Hijab applies to both men and women, the definition of which differs. But this is an example of prevention. Because if you let yourself, and same with mixing in an uncontrolled environment, you could even be wearing hijab and still, both male and female, like I said, you could be behaving, you could be ticking the box of hijab, but not ticking the other boxes. You put yourself in a situation, and under pressure, you compromise. And Islam says, don't put yourself in that situation. Use rules rather than discretion. Say, this is something I will never do. Don't say, I'll judge it in the moment. Don't say, I'll decide what to eat. Say, I will eat X if I want to be healthy. Say, I will do this. Don't let yourself make a decision in that point of difficulty, of compromise. Rules, not discretion. Doesn't religion teach us this all day long? Pray 5 times a day. Fast. Doesn't it train us to follow rules, not discretion? Don't say, I'll feel when it's right to make the decision. Don't say, I'll judge it on the day. Don't say, I'll fast when I think the time is right. No, rules. You do this, this, this. It has a benefit in many ways, but one of the benefits, it helps us become better decision makers, even in matters that have nothing to do with religion, by the way. It's making us better decision makers. If wajibat were optional, were discretionary, we'll start to do them like dua, right? We do it when we think is right. We don't do it every day. I'll pick and choose. And so my brothers, my sisters, it is very important for us to understand that religion, if you believe, and you're here because you believe, religion is, and the Quran, and the Sunnah of Ahlul Bayt, and the Prophet, this is the manual written by the manufacturer. You know when you buy a car and they say you need to change the oil they don't say change the oil when you think it's right, do they? They say change the oil when the indicator turns on. Change the oil every so many thousand miles. Do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. And the manufacturer, who better than the manufacturer knows their system, right? Now the manufacturer of my mind and yours, the creator of me, has given us a manual with instructions. And so the rational part of us should tell us that we should just follow, because that's the best source of that information. And you find that Islam, it's part of its beauty that it addresses both the very rational part of us, but it also gives us tools and techniques that would help us with the other parts that sometimes we weren't even aware of. And this was quite inspiring for me when I was thinking about these things. Thinking that 500 years ago, there were people that benefited, that avoided making these mistakes simply because they believed in Islam. And the key point is this: what else that research will reveal in 100 years or in 200 years that we don't know about today? What other benefits that have been built into the system that today we don't know about? So it's irrational, my brothers, my sisters, to go and say, I want you to justify why is Maghrib 3 rak'ahs whereas Isha is 4. Why is this? Why? Well, rationally, if you accept the model, you accept the equation, you accept the numbers that go in, then you have to accept the output. If you accept the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and religion, and if you accept the Prophet and his infallibility, and accept the rules of religion, and you accept that they're there for a reason, then you have to accept what comes out of the process. Rationally, we have to accept what comes out of the process and get the benefits. There are lots of them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't gain anything from me worshipping or not. They're all for my own benefit, for my own learning. And I gave the analogy of schools, that in schools they make us do experiments in science, in biology, in physics. They make us do experiments when the teacher knows the answer, right? The teacher knows the correct answer is X, and if I get Y, they'll say we've done it wrong. If you don't get the answer the teacher wants you to get, you have to explain why you didn't get it, right? So the purpose of that experiment you do in a physics lab isn't to discover something new, but rather the teacher doesn't gain anything from it. You gain by going through the process, just like I gain by worshipping. I become a better person, a better decision maker. And so when you look at religion, you look at it in its entirety. And one of those identity forming, those very important steps, are the events of Karbala. And there were so many examples that show us in those moments of difficulty and temptation and challenge, some choked and some succeeded and made a huge difference. We talk about Al-Hur bin Yazid al-Riyahi on the day of Ashura. Al-Hur was on the camp of Umar ibn Sa'd. You have these two people, both on the same camp, both enemies of Hussein. Umar ibn Sa'd, the commander of the army, knew Hussein much better than Hur did. Umar ibn Sa'd grew up with Imam al-Hussein. You know that? In Medina. They were school They were friends from childhood. They knew each other well. He knew exactly who Hussein was. But on the day when he was tempted with being given a position of government and money, he was opposed to Hussein. Al-Hur was on the same camp as Umar bin Sa'd. But when it mattered on the day of Ashura, Al-Hur switched sides. And when he was asked why, he said, I'm giving myself a choice between heaven and hell, and I will never choose hell over heaven. When the situation was difficult in a battlefield, Al-Hur had taken the right steps before that, so that on the day he was able to make the right decision, whereas Umar bin Sa'd couldn't. You know Umar bin Sa'd, this guy that knew Hussein that I told you, on the last few moments of the life of Imam al-Hussein, Umar bin Sa'd was standing there. Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam called to him, Ay Umar, ayuqtalu Abu Abdullah wa anta tanzuru ilayh? Hussein is being killed, being slaughtered, and you watch? So he looked away and cried. The commander of the army that was murdering Hussein turns away and cries because he knows Hussein and he knows his role. Yet, even in that moment, he gives the order to the army to finish their job and kill Hussein. And he knew Zainab. He's from Medina, he knows Zainab and he knows the role of Zainab. Yet on the 11th day, you know what Umar bin Sa'd did? He ordered for all the heads to be severed, to be put on spears and to be sent to Kufa. And he took the family of Ahlul Bayt, Zainab, as a prisoner of war. They humiliated the family of Ahlul Bayt and dragged them all the way. And historians say on that day when they were heading to Kufa, they went past the bodies, the remains, the slain bodies of Ahlul Bayt and the companions. And then they were saying their farewell while being dragged like prisoners of war all the way to Kufa. And then in those moments, they arrived in Kufa and Umar bin Sa'd had them over. And then they were dragged all the way to Damascus. And Ahlul Bayt, the family of Ahlul Bayt were being treated like this. In the palace of Yazid, a man doesn't know who these people are, looks to the daughter of Hussein, to Fatima, and says, Yazid, please give me this slave as a present. He wants to take Fatima, the daughter of Hussein, as a slave, as a present from the king to him. And so Fatima says, I looked to my aunt Zainab and said, is this going to happen? Am I going to be enslaved even more? I'm a prisoner of war now. Is this guy going to take me to his house and use me as a slave? And I'm the daughter of Hussein? They said, no, this won't happen. And then that was a situation that Ahlul Bayt had to face, being looked at as slaves and prisoners of war, and they had to deal with it. But even in those situations, even the children of Hussein retained their composure, were able to stand their ground, were able to make the right decisions, because for years before that moment, they were prepared. Because for years, they were trained to make the right decisions. So when it mattered under pressure, they did. My brothers, my sisters, let us pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He may give us the clarity, the strength to do what is right, to obey the rules of religion because of the benefits they bring to our lives and because of our belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He may, when it mattered, gives us the support so that we may be those who deserve to be on the side of Hussein, not the side of Umar ibn Sa'd, to be with Hur, not with Umar. And then maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hasten the return of our Imam and put us in a position to be on his side, so that we may fulfill our duties and succeed in this life and the next. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.
يا حسين Hussein.
Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein.
Ya Hussein.
Ya Hussein.
Ya Hussein.
Ya Hussein. Brothers and sisters, inshallah, we're going to be doing julus.